The morning sun had barely risen when the sound of metal clashing echoed through the dusty roadside garage, followed by a woman's sharp, dismissive laugh that cut deeper than any blade. The kind of laugh that didn't just mock skill, it mocked a life. A black luxury car sat in the middle of the garage, its polished body gleaming like it didn't belong there, like it was judging everything around it. And standing beside it, arms crossed and eyes cold with authority, was a woman who had never known what it meant to struggle. Across from her stood a man with grease-stained hands, a tired face, and eyes that carried the quiet weight of responsibility. He didn't look like someone who belonged in a story of miracles. He looked like someone the world had already forgotten. But this was the day everything would change. Before we dive into this emotional journey, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echoes the Stories, if you believe in kindness and second chances. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of faith can rewrite entire destinies. The woman's name was Serafina Voss, a powerful CEO known across the city for her ruthless decisions and unshakable confidence. She had built an empire from nothing, or so the headlines claimed, and now she walked through life like nothing could ever challenge her again. Her time was money, and her patience was thinner than glass. The man she stood before was Kalen Riaz, a single father and mechanic who had spent years holding his life together with the same determination he used to fix broken engines. His small roadside garage was all he had left after losing his wife to illness 3 years ago. Since then, every sunrise meant another day of survival, for himself and for his young daughter, Amira. Serafina's car had broken down unexpectedly that morning, right in the middle of a business trip that couldn't be delayed. Her driver had insisted on stopping at the nearest garage, which happened to be Kalen's. She looked around with visible disdain, her eyes scanning the cracked walls, the scattered tools, and the worn-out equipment. To her, this place wasn't a business, it was a failure. She had watched Kalen for a few minutes as he examined the car, his movements calm but careful. Then she laughed, a sound that seemed too loud for the quiet morning. She told him to fix the engine, and if he could actually manage it, she would marry him. It wasn't a promise. It was a joke. A cruel one. The kind meant to remind someone of their place. Kalen didn't react the way she expected. He didn't argue. He didn't show anger. He didn't even look insulted. Instead, he simply nodded and turned back to the engine, as if her words had never been spoken. Because for him, there was no room for pride when survival was at stake. Time passed slowly under the growing heat of the day. The sun climbed higher, and sweat dripped from Kalen's brow as he worked. His hands moved with precision, guided not just by experience but by something deeper, a quiet determination to prove something, though even he wasn't sure what. Serafina watched from a distance, initially out of impatience, but gradually, something else began to take hold. Curiosity. There was something unusual about the way he worked. No rush, no panic, no showmanship. Just focus. Pure, unwavering focus. She checked her watch repeatedly, growing restless, but every time she looked back at him, she found herself watching a little longer than before. In the middle of it all, a small voice broke the silence. A little girl ran into the garage, her school uniform slightly wrinkled, her backpack bouncing behind her. She went straight to Kalen, wrapping her arms around him without hesitation. He paused his work for just a second, wiping his hands before gently placing one on her head. There was no grand moment, no dramatic exchange, just a simple gesture filled with warmth. Serafina noticed it. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it unsettled her. She had spent her life chasing power, control, and perfection. She had no time for attachments, no space for vulnerability. Yet here was a man, covered in grease, standing in a broken garage, who somehow carried something she didn't have. Peace. As the hours passed, the tension in the air shifted. What began as mockery slowly turned into anticipation. Even Serafina, who had made the challenge as a joke, now found herself silently hoping he would succeed. Not because she believed in him, but because she needed to understand him. Finally, as the sun began its descent, Kalen stepped back from the car. He closed the hood gently, almost respectfully, and wiped his hands on a worn cloth. He looked at her, not with pride, but with quiet certainty. He told her it was done. Serafina hesitated for the first time that day. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the concrete, and signaled her driver to start the engine. The moment stretched. The key turned. And the engine roared to life. Not just functioning, but smooth, powerful, flawless. The sound filled the garage like a declaration. For the first time, Serafina was speechless. Her joke had just become reality. But instead of laughter, there was only silence. Because something had shifted, not just in the situation, but inside her. She looked at Kalen differently now. Not as a mechanic. Not as someone beneath her. But as someone who had just done what she didn't think was possible. And suddenly, her words from earlier didn't feel like a joke anymore. They felt like a challenge she had made to her. Days passed, but the moment refused to leave her mind. Meetings blurred together, numbers lost their meaning, and the empire she had built began to feel strangely hollow. Meanwhile, Kalen returned to his life as if nothing had happened. He continued working long hours, raising Amira, and pushing forward through the same struggles he had always known. But something had changed for him too. Not in his circumstances, but in his perspective. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen him. Even if it had started as mockery, it had ended in acknowledgement. And sometimes, that was enough to spark something new. Serafina found herself returning to the garage days later, this time without urgency, without an audience, and without arrogance. She stood there quietly, watching him work again. He noticed her, but he didn't stop. Because to him, she was just another person now. Not someone above him. Not someone to impress. Just someone passing through. And that changed everything. What followed wasn't a dramatic romance or a sudden transformation. It was something slower, deeper, and more real. Conversations began, simple at first, then gradually more personal. She learned about Amira, about the nights Kalen stayed awake worrying about bills, about the quiet strength it took to keep going when life gave you every reason to stop. And for the first time in her life, Serafina listened. Not as a CEO. But as a human being. In return, Kalen learned about the loneliness behind her success. The sacrifices, the isolation, the constant pressure to never show weakness. Two completely different worlds. Yet somehow, they began to meet in the middle. Months passed, and the connection between them grew, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. Serafina started investing in the garage, not as charity, but as belief. She helped modernize it, expand it, and turn it into something greater. But she never took control. Because she knew it wasn't hers to control. And Kalen, in turn, began to see a version of her no one else had ever seen. Not the CEO. But the woman behind it all. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold, they stood outside the garage, watching Amira play nearby. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic confessions. Just a quiet moment of truth. The same place where it had all begun. The same challenge that had once been a joke. Now carried a different meaning. Before we reach the end of this journey, if this story has touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Your support helps stories like this reach those who need them most. And here's a special request: comment below with the word "believe" if you think people can change and kindness can transform lives. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about a mechanic fixing an engine. It was about a man who fixed something far more broken. A heart that had forgotten how to feel. And a woman who finally learned that strength isn't about standing above others. It's about standing beside them. And sometimes, the most powerful transformations don't come from success. They come from humility, understanding, and the courage to see someone for who they truly are.